Hey guys, how are you all? My name is Harshit Dwivedi friends and I welcome you back to my video. So in this video friends, we will be talking to you regarding composting. What is this process of composting? As you can see in this figure friends, there is a dustbin in front of you. In this you can see the onion peel, some green vegetables, the waste of green vegetables, then some egg shelf are there. So you can see here in this figure, friends, that a lot of waste, especially the waste food products, are being disposed inside this dustbin, which you can say here to be the compost pit. And then this whole thing will go through the process of composting and convert itself into a useful manure. Okay, so the end material will be something useful manure, a nutrient rich soil, which can help crops grow, which can help plants grow, trees grow. So basically the definition of composting is that it is a process that works to speed up the natural decay of organic matter. Kindly keep in focus this thing, organic matter, material, providing the ideal conditions of detritus eating organisms to thrive. The end product is a concern of this concentrated decomposition process is a nutrient rich soil, which you can say here as manure. So this manure is the end product, and this manure will help the crops to grow good, the garden plants and trees to grow. So basically this is the whole definition of composting. When we talk about composting, there are some requirements for the proper happening of this process. These requirements are warm temperatures. There has to be an optimum amount of warm temperatures. However, keep one thing in mind, that this warm temperature should not go beyond a limit, because if this warm temperature is going to go beyond a limit, then obviously the whole process will go in the negative direction and the useful microorganisms will also die. So there is a maximum limit of temperature. I am going to discuss that with you in some amount of time. Then the second requirement is the optimum amount of nutrients. Two nutrients I'm going to talk to you are carbon and nitrogen in this video. Then moisture has to be in a proper balance, and oxygen has to be in a proper balance. There should be a plenty of oxygen during this process. So these are the four requirements: warm temperature, nutrients, moisture, and plenty of oxygen. So these are the four requirements which we require during this composting process, friends. Now, whenever this composting process takes place, it takes place in three stages. I am going to talk to you about all those three stages. The very first stage lasts for around 2 to 5 days. The first stage of composting. What is happening in this first stage of composting? The type of microorganisms which are active during this first stage of composting are mesophillic microorganisms. Mesophillic microorganisms. Now, what are these mesophillic microorganisms? See, friends, mesophillic microorganisms are those class of microorganisms which survive in temperatures in the ranges of 20 to 45 degrees Celsius or from 68 to 113 degree Fahrenheit. So these are the ranges. So basically these mesophillic microorganisms, they survive in the range of 20 to 45 degrees Celsius and 68 to 113 degree Fahrenheit. So basically these are mesophillic microorganisms, and basically what these mesophillic microorganisms do, they physically break down the biodegradable compounds. Their job is to physically break down these biodegradable compounds, that is the nutrients that are present in these biodegradable compounds. What are these biodegradable compounds? Those waste products which we are putting inside the compost pit. They can be a banana peel, they can be egg shells, they can be sawdust, anything. So these type of things which are kept in a compost pile, those are biodegradable compounds, and the physical breakdown of those biodegradable compounds are being done by microorganisms. In the first stage, the mesophillic microorganisms are active, which thrive in temperatures of 68 degree to 113 degree Fahrenheit and 20 to 45 degree Celsius. And obviously one byproduct of this whole process in the first stage is heat. When these elements are going to break down, obviously some amount of energy is released, and that energy will increase the temperature. So the temperature at the end of this first stage will be somewhere around 40 degrees Celsius. Now coming on to the second stage, what is happening in the second stage of this whole process of composting? See friends, in second stage, the place of these mesophillic microorganisms will be taken by thermophillic microorganisms. What are these thermophillic microorganisms? Thermophillic microorganisms are those microorganisms which can survive in temperature in higher temperatures. For example, if the temperature goes above 40 degrees centigrades, so from 40 degrees centigrades to around 65 degrees centigrades, so in this range, these thermophillic microorganisms survive, especially in the process of composting. This process of composting can last from some few days to some few months. It depends upon the sort of input that you are putting inside that compost pile, friends. Also, the same thing is happening. What was happening in the first stage, the very same thing is happening in the second stage. Biodegradable compounds are going to be break down into very fine pieces, and obviously in the second stage the temperatures are higher than the first stage, so those higher temperatures are conducive to the faster breakdown of these biodegradable compounds, and the end products will be obviously heat, and you are going to get some carbohydrates, some fats, some protein. So these will be the end products of the second stage. Got it, friends? Now, in the second stage, there is some catch, friends. During the second stage, the temperature of this compost pile will increase, and at some point of time, it may increase to such a level that it may lead to the death of some useful, some beneficial microorganisms. So it is very important that the temperature of this compost pile in the second stage, it is not allowed to rise beyond a certain limit, and that limit is somewhere around 65 degrees centigrade or 149 degree Fahrenheit. This you need to keep in mind, friends. Okay, so this should be in the range of 149 degree Fahrenheit or 65 degree centigrade. They should not go above it. And for that, in order to keep the temperature under control, you need to use techniques such as aeration. You need to turn over the compost pile regularly so that appropriate of oxygen can reach it. The temperatures can be more evenly distributed. So things like these should be there, friends. Okay. Now, what's happened in the third stage, friends? Third stage comes when all of the input biodegradable compounds have been used. So when the complete utilization and the complete consumption of the biodegradable compounds has been done, then comes the third stage. And during the third stage, the temperature of the compost pile starts getting stabilized, because now the heat is not coming out as the end product. So the process is stabilizing now. Got it? So this is the whole three stages, friends. The first stage, the second stage, and the third stage. Now, one thing we need to know, friends, that the sort of microorganisms which are doing this process of breakdown of these biodegradable compounds. See, if 100% is the microorganisms, around 80% to 90% of them are bacteria. 80 to 90% is bacteria. In the rest comes fungi, yield, yeast, mold, then centipede, worms. So basically 80 to 90% is bacteria, the rest is fungi, yeast, mold, centipede, worms. When we talk about this 80 to 90% bacteria part, there are two types. One is aerobic, which happens in the presence of oxygen. One is anaerobic, which happens in the absence of oxygen. You need to understand both of these processes. Aerobic microorganisms are those microorganisms that require some amount of oxygen to function. Whenever these aerobic microorganisms break down the compost, they are going to produce nutrients like nitrogen, they are going to produce phosphorus, they are going to produce magnesium. So they are going to produce nitrogen, phosphorus, magnesium, and you very well know that these things like this nitrogen, phosphorus, and magnesium, they are beneficial for plants. And obviously, when this nitrogen, phosphorus, and magnesium, they are beneficial for plants, then this whole process which this aerobic microorganisms are doing is overall beneficial, because here the compost pile is producing some useful nutrients. Wherever when this anaerobic microorganisms are at play, what these anaerobic microorganisms are doing? See, friends, these anaerobic microorganisms, these are those bacteria that don't require oxygen. Okay, so basically their efficiency is less than the aerobic bacteria efficiency. Also, in many cases, this anaerobic decomposition, these anaerobic microorganisms produce some toxic substances also. That is, many times it also produces things like hydrogen sulfide. This is one example. Now this hydrogen sulfide is so smelly that it, a very bad sort of smell is coming from the compost pile if this hydrogen sulfide is produced. through these anaerobic microorganisms function. So bacteria are two types, aerobic and anaerobic. The efficiency of aerobic is best. It is producing useful components, whereas anaerobic is not that efficient. Got it? Sometimes anaerobics are also producing components which are toxic to the plant life or to the ecosystem. Got it, friends? Now, coming on to the very next thing in front of us is green and brown. Okay. Whenever a compost pile is prepared, friends, it is very important that a sort of balance should be maintained in the input that is being kept inside that compost pile. And that input here is classified into two parts, green input, brown input. What comes under green input? Green input is that input which is rich in nitrogen. When what will come into it? The grass clippings will come into it. The fruit waste will come into it. The vegetable waste will come into it. So this green is rich in nitrogen, the grass waste, the fruit waste, the vegetable waste is going to come into it. Whereas when we talk about this brown input into this compost pile, what will come in this brown input? So yard clippings are going to come into brown input. Yard clippings. Now what is this yard clippings? Yard clippings is something, friends, that see, in trees, in plants, or the excess amount of grass you will see in a grass in a ground. When the excess amount of grass is there, through a grass cutter, that excess amount of grass is removed. Then obviously in the trees, whenever some sub branches of the branches grow on the tree which is not required, so they are being cut off. In plants also, when the overgrowth in the branches of the plants is there, some of those branches and sub branches are being cut off. So basically this whole comprises the yard clipping. Got it, friends? So things like yard clippings, okay, then dead leaves, then branches, then twigs in trees, the branches, the sub branches on the branches are known as twigs. You can search for twigs on the internet. So basically these yard clippings, dead leaves, branches, twigs, they are the part of brown compost. And grass, fruit, vegetables, they are the part of green input in the compost. So basically this is green and brown classification. The next is carbon to nitrogen ratio. The carbon to the nitrogen ratio in the compost ideally should be in between 25:1 to 30:1. Here 25 represents carbon, 1 represents nitrogen, 30 represents carbon, 1 represents nitrogen. So it should be between 25:1 to 30:1. Got it? So this carbon to nitrogen ratio is ideal for rapid composting. Now friends, that these carbon and nitrogen are important nutrients. Microorganisms feed on both carbon and nitrogen, and there has to be a proper balance of this carbon and nitrogen, because both of these nutrients are doing different things. This carbon is providing energy to the microorganisms, and through that energy, when this carbon is used to produce energy in that microorganisms, the end products are CO2 and heat. Whereas this nitrogen, when the microorganisms are feeding on this nitrogen, what these microorganisms are getting, they are getting nutrition other than this energy. So basically carbon and nitrogen, both of these feeds are important for microorganisms, and a balance has to be maintained. That is, there cannot be excess carbon dioxide and there cannot be excess nitrogen. Each of these things have its problem. For example, if the level of carbon increases in the compost pile, if in the carbon to nitrogen ratio, if the carbon increases, so obviously when the carbon will relatively increase, nitrogen will decrease. In that case, the microorganisms are not going to get this nutrition. So the tendency to grow and reproduce, that tendency will be lower. So the growth of microorganisms will be slow. And when the growth of microorganisms will be slow, the decomposition process will also be slow. The compost will turn into manure very late. So basically, an increased amount of carbon is to nitrogen ratio is not good. Whereas if you are going to increase the level of nitrogen excessively, in that case, higher levels of ammonia will be produced. Many other toxic compounds will be produced, which will give a very foul smell and will also reduce the quality of the compost. So there has to be a balance between carbon and nitrogen, and none of these can be in excess. Got it? I think this is also very much clear to you. Now, friends, one very important factor in this whole thing is proper moisture. I have already told you initially about moisture. Moisture has to be in optimum quantity, and the optimum quantity of moisture is 40 to 60%. There has to be some 40 to 60% of moisture in this compost pile. if the moisture is above 60%, then obviously the moisture quantity will be so high that oxygen will get eliminated. And if the moisture quantity is less, then dampness will be there. So there has to be an optimum amount of moisture content in the compost pile in order to keep a balance. Got it, friends? Then also, friends, the amount of oxygen has to be in a proper quantity. This presence of oxygen is a very deciding factor. Okay, if oxygen is there, then the process of composting will go on in a proper manner. However, if oxygen is not present in appropriate quantity, what will happen? I told you that there were two types of bacteria. One were aerobic bacteria and one were anaerobic bacteria. So if the absence of oxygen is there and proper supply of oxygen is not present, then anaerobic bacteria will become dominant. And as I've already told you that anaerobic bacteria are not that efficient and they can also produce some toxic substances. So an appropriate amount of oxygen is required. Then what things you can put in this compost? You can put fruits, friends. You can put vegetables. You can put sawdust. Okay, so things like this, you can put twigs, you can put bananas and things like that. Okay, friends. So a lot of things, yard trimmings you can put newspapers, you can put paper, cardboard, things like that. So a lot of things can be put inside the compost pile. However, there are some things that should not be kept in the compost pile, and this is the list of those things that should not be kept in the compost pile. They include certain types of tree leaves, some twigs like black walnut because they release substances which are not good for the plant health. Then coal and coal ash should not be placed because it contains very toxic things like cadmium, mercury, which can be harmful to plants. Similarly, dairy products, eggs, fats and oils, meat, fish bones, scraps, they should not be kept in the compost pile because they have an odor problems. They will attract flies and rodents towards them, which may disturb the whole process of composting. Insect infested plants, diseased plants should not be kept in the compost pile because that infection may still, you know, persist and may pollute the final compost. Also, pet waste, the excretory products of pets should not be used in compost pile because it may contain many parasites, bacteria and viruses. Yard trimmings, I've already told you what yard trimmings are. They are actually the most exposed part of grass, plant or trees. So they are very highly exposed to chemical pesticides. So these yard trimmings which are very much highly exposed to chemical pesticides, they should not be put into compost because they can also kill the composting organisms and they can also finally pollute the prepared compost which will be used for the enrichment of the soil. So all of these things should be kept in mind. So I hope this video was helpful for you. The complete process of composting is being explained to you. You can like this video, friends. You can subscribe to the channel. You can share these videos with your friends on your Instagram profiles, in your social media profiles. You can follow me on YouTube, friends. So thank you for watching this video, friends. Have a great day. The Hindi version of this video is already uploaded. The link is given in the description box below. If you want to watch more environment and ecology videos, the link of the playlist is given in the description box below. So thank you for watching, friends. And I've made videos on a whole lot of topics. The link of all of those playlists is given in the description box below.